We're beginning to get some pretty exciting results. So we'll be continuing with that trial during the coming season, and we're also going to run this little garden entirely organically without a hint of chemicals at all, and you'll be able to see how we get on. We're pretty confident that it's going to work because last year we visited Chris Algar at Hounslow. He'd just won a competition to find the best organic garden in Britain. And he reckoned that provided you got your soil right first, you were 3/4 of the way there. Oh, so that's the secret of your soil fertility, is it, Chris?
Well, it's part of it, yes.
What exactly is that?
It's rotted stable manure.
Stable manure. Now, hang on a minute. You live in Hounslow. Where on earth do you get stable manure in Hounslow?
Well, it's not difficult. There are quite a few stables around this area, and I should imagine most people have one fairly near them.
So you reckon that even in the middle of a big city, you can always find it if you look for it?
Judging by the number of horses that seem to be around everywhere, yes.
Yes, I quite agree with you. You collect that in bags, do you?
Yeah, we bag it up and bring it here and rot it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it certainly looks good stuff, but you're composting that now. Why do you feel it's necessary?
Well, it's partly because I like to do my best to break down any agricultural chemicals which are on the straw, and partly because it incorporates into the soil much better than if you use it as it is.
Right, so what do you do with it?
Well, I get it in... This is a condition I get it, you could say completely unrotted, but a bit dry for composting. So I put it into the container, and I wet it as I go, build it up to a level somewhere about there. Then I cover it with polythene to keep the moisture and the heat in. And once it's cooled down, I remove it from the container to get more air into it and return it and let it rot once more. It reheats then. Right,
how long does it take before you feel it's ready for the soil?
Depending on the outside temperature, somewhere in the region of 3 to 6 months, I would think.
And what sort of thing do you finish up with?
Well, that's the end product, about 6 months old.
Oh, yes, this looks beautiful, doesn't it? But, of course, gardening is really all about plants, and here at Barnsdale we're building up quite a good plant collection now of the sort of things that we feel we can recommend you grow in your garden. This is our alpine house, and, you know, alpines really are fascinating plants. Of course, this is the easy way to do it, but when Roy Lancaster visited DENIS Davis in Patterdale, he found a halfway up a mountain.
This really is what you call rock garden on a massive scale, Dillis. What do you call this, Golly?
Tibet.
Tibet?
It's most suitable for simple-minded yaks and people.
Your visitors get altitude sickness or something. But this isn't normally a path, though, coming down, is it?
It was. We found these ledges under the refuse here and started planting them up with plants and using the crevices for
Obviously
smaller.
very successful. How do you establish plants on a rock face like that?
Well, first of all, I looked for suitable crevices. There's one over here.
Right.
And this begonia will survive in very little soil.
I shall now hold those while you get down there.
Cute. And I would normally use a stone for ballast with the plant on top, then top it up with some compost just to give it a decent start in life.
What prevents the rain from washing the compost out?
The plant itself, that will quietly fit in and its roots will anchor it.
And would you put a stone on the top as well, just to keep that? Should I have that bucket?
No, I won't with that because the begonia has a big enough root ball.
Right. And then other methods?
Well, other methods, I've adapted some of these rock ledges and made mini paddy fields.
Paddy?
Paddy fields.
What, they're full of water?
Well, the water flows down here normally, which is why the rock is slippy today.
So they're starting here. You can whole series here of what, terraced beds. Oh, is that a good example of what you've just done, is it?
Yes, this is Candelabra primula that uses the rock seep. Because normally you wouldn't expect it to be an alpine plant, would you?
He's happy enough, isn't he?
Yes.
Quite some garden, that, and quite a gardener, too. Well, of course, there's not a lot of colour around in most gardens at this time of the year, but we think we can even dispel that bit of winter gloom, because in between our visits to Barnsdale at the beginning part of the year, we'll be showing 5 programmes that we recorded last year in some really superb gardens when they were at their very best. There are some good gardening ideas there, and it will also serve to remind you that spring really is just around the corner. We also did something rather special this year. We took our cameras to Italy, where Roy Lancaster visited some really magnificent gardens. Amongst them was the garden at Isola Bella on Lake Maggiore. This was built in the 16th century by Carlo Borromeo for his wife Isabella.
Carlo Borromeo's original idea was for turning the island into a fantastic ship emerging from the waters of the lake and bedecked with flowers. It consists of a truncated pyramid with a series of terraces, one on top of another, linked by steps. The whole structure masks an enormous system that provides water for the pools and fountains. The central area, known as the theatre, is dominated by this incredible structure with its shells, grottos and statues and parading peacocks. Above this, overlooking all, is the statue of a unicorn, the symbol of the Borromeo family.
Well, lucky old Roy Lancaster, I say, but his life's not always as cushy as that, because in fact he's here today in the frost of an English winter, and he'll be looking at some plants that may not be quite as exotic as those in Italy, but will certainly brighten up our gardens at this time of the year. It's a little bit early now to be sowing most seeds, but there is one notable exception, and that's geraniums. If you want those to be in flower by the time they're planted out in June, it really is essential to get them going now. At first sight, they seem a bit expensive. They're £1.75 for 9 seeds, but if you compare that with the cost of buying plants later in the year, you'll see they're in fact very cheap. Mind you, you won't want to heat the whole greenhouse for them, so the thing to do is to get those going in the airing cupboard round about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Do that right now. Keep an eye on them. Once they've germinated, they can come out on the windowsill. Now, they want as much light as possible, so when they have germinated, I'm going to be growing mine on in the patent Barnsdale light box, which will give you as much light as possible. They should be germinated by the next time we come here in a fortnight's time, so I'll go into this in more detail then. More urgent advice at the moment comes from Anne Swithinbank. She's the ex-glasshouse superintendent at the Royal Horticultural Society Gardens at Wisley, and she's concerned that we get the very best out of our Christmas houseplants.
A lot of people will have been given plants as Christmas presents, or maybe will have just gone out to buy them to decorate the home during the festive season. But I expect a lot of people will be wondering what to do with them now, how to keep them healthy and how to look after them to get more growth out of them later and more flowers. I have a cineraria here, and they really like bright, cool conditions in rooms. They hate central heating. If you put one in a centrally heated room where it's very hot or the temperature's going up and down, it will just begin to die, its leaves will go pale, and it doesn't do it much good at all. And you need to check them for pests as well. You can see this one has quite bad leaf miner on it. This is a nasty little creature that lives between the 2 layers of the leaf. You can just see the little grubs in there, and it will do quite a lot of damage. So if you see this starting, take the leaves off and burn them so that the little pest doesn't get a chance to take hold. Otherwise you'll end up having to spray for it. And of course when the cineraria finishes, I'm afraid that's it. It's only an annual, so it will die and have to be thrown away. But not the cyclamen. This cyclaмен's got a rather sad story behind it. It looks a bit sad. It was bought and put straight into a centrally heated room where it stayed for about 3 weeks, and it really did collapse and all its flowers started to die. And really the only thing to do with these now is to just remove them and clean the plant up. But we have moved it into a cooler room, and you can see that there are quite a lot of buds coming that are fresh and healthy and haven't dried up at all at the base. So with good care and attention, this really should grow back into a nice plant, and there's a lot of life left in it yet. If you've had a cyclamen that's been going strong for several months, it's probably begun to go out of flower and there's not many buds coming on them. And these can now be gradually dried out. Only gradually, because we don't want to dry them out too quickly. Keep them in leaf as long as possible so that they're only beginning to dry off in the spring. and sort of late spring, and they can be laid on their sides and potted up and started again late summer so they can flower again for the Christmas. And we have a Solanum capsicastrum here, which is, of course, the winter cherry. This is a bit different, as in, unlike the other two, which like cool conditions, it needs a fairly warm temperature. It wants to be about 60 Fahrenheit, really, and a nice even temperature. And it should carry on producing all these lovely fruits all through the winter. If you do let it start fluctuating, the temperature, then the fruits are liable to start falling off and the leaves will get tatty. But it's good with these because when they're finished flowering, you can let them go dormant for a short while and then cut back the growths quite hard all the way around. So you're cutting, you know, right down to about here, and the plant will sprout back again so that it will grow all through the spring and summer to produce a fresh lot of flowers and berries for next winter. I'm sure you'll all recognise the mother-in-law's tongue, which is producing a little baby at the side. And I brought this out because I thought a lot of people might be tempted to take that off and propagate it. But really, I wouldn't advocate any propagation of houseplants between really the months of November and February, because the light levels are so low and it's so cold and we've got such strange conditions in the house for them that it's very hard to get anything going during the winter. If you really do want to make more mother-in-law's tongue, then wait until the spring and then take it off. Otherwise, just keep the temperature even and keep the watering down. In fact, it hardly needs watering at all at this time of year.
Just look at that, it's horrible, isn't it? I've got pretty heavy soil here at Barnsdale with a lot of clay in it, and the last thing you want to do when the weather's as wet as this is to walk on it, let alone cultivate it. If you do that, you lose the soil structure, you turn it into mud, and eventually when it dries out it'll set like concrete, and that's no good for plants at all. On the other hand, I'm intent here on growing the earliest crops possible, and that means sowing round about February time. That's quite a dilemma. Well, you can solve it with a combination of several techniques. The first thing to do is to divide the early crops area to mark it out into 4-foot wide beds, and then cover the piece of ground you want for early crops with a piece of polythene. That will keep the weather off the soil, and the sun will also help to warm it up, and it's surprising how quickly it will be ready for cultivation. Now, I've had this piece of land covered for about 3 weeks, so let's just have a look at that. That's not too bad at all. You can see that will cultivate perfectly well. Now, when I've dug that over, I won't walk on it again at all for the same reason, for fear of spoiling the soil structure. I'll work from these paths at the side. And in itself presents a problem because all the water comes off the polythene onto the paths. You're continually walking on it, it turns into a quagmire, and again you're spoiling structure. So you must work off boards. Now, these boards are actually scaffold boards, and I must admit, mighty expensive. You'll do a lot better off going to the demolition contractor's yard and buying some old second-hand boards, but do bear in mind that they'll last you a lifetime if you look after them, and you'll be using them year after year after year. Now, here's a bed that I've already prepared for the very earliest crop, and you can see that the combination of deep digging plus working in plenty of garden compost has raised it above the soil level, and this in itself is going to improve drainage and warm up the soil. You can see that's a lovely drop of stuff, isn't it? Nonetheless, I'm still going to keep this covered with polythene, and it will have two effects. First of all, the sun will warm up the surface of the soil, and it should by mid-February have reached the 45 degrees Fahrenheit necessary for sowing seeds. It will also encourage weed seeds to germinate, and that's a good thing, because once they've germinated, you can hoe those off, and then your cultivated seeds will be able to get away to a good head start without any competition from weeds. Well, we'll be coming back to this naturally in February when it's sowing and planting time, but right now the message is, for heaven's sake, if you want early crops, get a bit of land covered with polythene.
During the last few weeks, we've been having letters from gardeners all over the British Isles, writing to tell us about all the plants flowering in their gardens. There was one man from the far north who wrote to tell us about 31 different plants flowering in his garden on Christmas Day. Well, it has been mild, unusually mild for a British winter. We've had roses and fuchsias and all manner of summer flowering perennials and annuals in the gardens. Only yesterday, I saw a great big bush of ceanothus, Californian ceanothus, Swithinbank blue, in full flower, flowering its heart out. That's normally at its best in spring. Well, now it's at an end. Widespread frosts, cold winds have brought us back to normal. Well, it's nice to have colour, summer colour, exotics in the middle of winter, but you can't rely on them. What you need are plants which you can rely on for winter colour. Now, although Geoff has quite a few plants here for winter flowers, they're young, recently planted, and haven't really reached flowering maturity. So I brought along here a selection of winter plants, shrubs mainly, which you can rely on. All these from a garden centre, grown in containers in pots. And by the way, although they're ready, you may have them in the garden, bought them recently, had them as gifts for Christmas. You don't plant them in these conditions when the ground is hard and you need a pick to break through. One of the most reliable of old trees, for instance, and who hasn't seen it flowering these last few weeks, is this winter flowering Japanese cherry, Prunus subvertella autumnalis. And look at those flowers. They look so delicate considering the conditions they have to survive. Small, double, pale pink in bud, almost turning to white as they mature. Lots of them crowding the twigs. Now, the name autumnalis suggests that it starts in autumn, and it does. It's at its best in autumn, and it flowers again sometimes in spring. But if you have mild periods in winter, which we have had, then you can expect it flowering on any warm day. It's an easy, hardy tree growing in any conditions. Eventually, in good condition, it'll get up to 25 feet and as much across. But it takes a long time getting there. When it comes to winter flowering shrubs, I suppose one of the most popular or the most favoured of all is this viburnum, the winter flowering viburnum. Several kinds. This one's Viburnum bondentense. It's the variety Dawn. It makes a shrub of about 10 feet eventually. And all those, the tips of the shoots, plastered with these flowers which are rich pink in bud and opening to white as they mature. And of course, at the same time, giving off a very rich fragrance. Superb plant, again, like the cherry, easy, hardy, in any soil, chalk, acid, clay, as long as it isn't waterlogged. One of my favourite winter flowering plants is the winter jasmine. Now, this is a shrub, really. You can't really call it a climber because it can't climb on its own. You have to give it some support. But you'll see it all over the British Isles, growing on walls, pergolas, fences, sometimes on banks which it rambles down in great waves, green stems, and those beautiful primrose yellow flowers, slightly darker than primrose, I suppose. They will start flowering from November and continue, flower after flower, right through the winter, sometimes as late as February. Again, like the other two, easy, hardy, any soil. That was introduced by a Scot called Robert Fortune in the middle of the last century. What a plant to be remembered by. One of my favourite group of winter flowering shrubs, however, are the witch hazels, Hamamelis. Now, again, there's a whole range of varieties available through any nursery or garden centre. Only problem here is that they will not grow on chalk, although they will grow on chalk, yeah, but they're not really happy. They much prefer acid soils. There they grow to their best. Large bushes spreading, they can get up to 10 by 10, but in winter, sometimes before Christmas, if the weather is mild, as it has been, and as you'll notice from these, the flowers begin to emerge. There are two varieties here. There's pallida, the pale yellow one, and that coppery one is called Yelena. Now, the flowers open from tight buds, and the petals are strap-shaped and wiggly, and they unwind like the springs of a clock. And they always remind me of spiders, lots of spiders running up the stems. It's reliable, like the rest of these shrubs and trees. Reliable, you can depend on that to flower in winter. And even in autumn, you get a bonus with some of them of autumn colours, red, orange or yellow. For small gardens, I really mean small gardens, one of the best of all winter flowering plants, and it's evergreen, are the Christmas box. There are several. This one is Sarcococca confusa. It has black berries, replacing the white flowers which are just beginning to open now. It's still in bud, this one, but Given another week, it'll be opening white flowers, small but lots of them, crowding the shoots, and again, this bonus of scent, sweetly scented. Very good in shade or in a sunny situation. Skimmias. Skimmias are usually grown for their berries, at least the female plants grown for their berries. But the male forms are worth growing for the flowers, even the flower buds. Look at these two. The red one is called rubella, and next to it, the big crowded heads of one called Q green, Skimmia rubella and Skimmia Q green. Hardy, easy, compact, dwarf evergreens. When it comes for reliability, then I think Laurustinus or Viburnum tinus is really hard to beat. This one's called Eve Price. It's one of my favourites, one of the best of all the varieties available today. It's evergreen, it's compact, it has a fairly small leaf, and those flowers, you see, they're pink in bud, opening white. And the great thing about this is the succession of flowers. That begins flowering. All the Laurustinus begin flower in November and go right through, sometimes to early March. Another evergreen, this one with bold, handsome, prickly margin leaves, is the Mahonia. The most common Mahonia, of course, is Japonica. A lot of people grow that. But there's a group of Mahonias called Mahonia media, of which Charity is the most famous, which flower in November and go through until Christmas and sometimes beyond, like this one, Winter Sun, Mahonia Winter Sun. It's a hardy plant, and those fingers of flowers appear in succession. So the first one is blackened by the frost, then there are other flowers coming to replace it. Now to two rather special plants. Plants for the connoisseur, you might say. This first one is Psychopsis sinensis, as you say, evergreen. And believe it or not, it's in the same family as the witch hazel back there. That's a wiggly petal one. But the flowers of this plant don't have petals. They're really bunches of stamens. And when they first open from those brown capsules, as it were, they're red, and then they turn yellow. You can see how dense they are, lots of them clustering the stems. That shrub will get up to about 10 feet high, but it needs shelter. It'll grow on chalk, it'll grow on acid soils, but it needs the shelter of other shrubs or a wall in order to survive cold winds. And then a really special one in this Daphne. Now this has been made available this last few years. It's a rarity, Daphne jesuensis from Japan. It's dwarf. I expect you'll think it's evergreen, but it isn't. It's a deciduous plant. But the peculiar thing about it, loses its leaves in summer and grows a fresh crop in the autumn to last through the winter. And another unusual thing about it, obviously, it's yellow flowers right through the winter. Sometimes they're scented, but in other forms they're not. Now this is a rarity. It isn't hardy, perhaps in mild areas and a nice leafy soil, cool conditions, but it makes a superb dwarf shrub for the cool Hauser Conservatory.
At this time of year, I like to check my apple and pear trees to make sure the grease bands are still effective. They should be effective right from November to March to stop those wingless female moths from travelling up the trunks of the trees to lay their eggs in the top, which gives rise to all those horrible caterpillars which give the damage during the summer. If they have worn out or they've got little bits of debris on them, just put a new band on so that it will last for the rest of the winter. And about the only other thing we can do to fruit trees now is to give them a winter wash with tar oil. And tar oil's quite strong stuff, so don't put this on really after the end of January, because that's when the buds begin to swell and we could end up doing more harm than good. And why we're doing this is really to kill off the aphids' eggs. There are about 3 species of aphids whose eggs overwinter along the buds and twigs, and there's also the woolly aphis which overwinters as little aphids. And giving it a wash now will just clean the trees up and prevent too much damage later on in the year. With any luck, we should get a nice crop of apples.
One of the things we pride ourselves on in Gardener's World is that we can at least be topical. There's only a day between us recording the programme and you seeing it, so we can show you exactly what you should be doing in the garden right now. At this time of the year, that does leave us with a bit of a problem in that we can't predict the weather. So when I say to you that next time we're here in a fortnight, we're going to start on our budget back garden, then do bear with me if we're under 10 feet of snow, won't you? But hopefully we'll be able to show you how we built the fencing, and from then we're going to build the garden step by step. Starting with the bare soil, we're going to first of all build the patio. That's made out of concrete, which is very cheap and very effective too. I'll be wanting to make an early start on vegetables, so we're going to be digging some deep beds at the other end of the garden, and the planting will be on the cottage garden style, with all sorts of plants put in the same border, which really is the best way with small gardens. And then the lawn will be raised later on from seed. Now, we're going to run this garden on a budget, and there we hope to enlist your help. We've got plenty of ideas ourselves, things like the polystyrene coffee cups for pots and all sorts of polystyrene trays and Chinese takeaway trays for seed trays, and of course ties for tying things up. But if I know British gardeners, then you've got lots of good ideas yourselves. So do drop us a line and let's share them out. And for the one that we think is the most effective, there'll be a measly little prize. Well, we are working on a budget.
And just to repeat, if you have a budget idea, you might like to send it on a postcard to Budget Ideas, Gardener's World, BBC, Pebble Mill Road, Birmingham, B5 7QQ. And Gardener's World next week comes from Glyndebourne.